Welcome to Biscuits and Jam from Southern Living. I'm your host, Sid Evans, and in this episode, I'm talking with someone who not only played a musician on television, but who also has a music career in real life. Charles Esten was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, but after his parents divorced, he moved to Virginia with his mother and his sister. He went to college at William and Mary, met his wife there, and then went on to play Buddy Holly in a long-running stage production in the UK. Eventually, he landed a role on a new TV series called Nashville as the troubled songwriter Deacon Claybourne, where he got to show off the musical skills that he'd been developing since childhood. More recently, Charles has been playing the character of Ward Cameron on Outer Banks. And now, after releasing a whole lot of singles through the years, he's come out with his first full-length album. It's called Love Ain't Pretty, and in many ways, it's a tribute to his dad, who introduced him to so much of the music he loves. We'll talk about all that and the Southern hospitality at the Grand Ole Opry on this week's Biscuits and Jam. Charles Esten, welcome to Biscuits and Jam.
Thank you so much. Glad to be here.
Where am I reaching you right now?
I am in Nashville, Tennessee. You can see right up on the wall behind me. There we go. That's the John Siegenthaler footbridge that crosses the mighty Cumberland River right down in the heart of Nashville, and means a lot. My wife got me that because that's one of the most important sets that we used on the show Nashville. My character was on that bridge a number of times. So we moved here for the show, and we never saw a good reason to leave.
Oh, that's great. So you're at home.
Yeah.
So, Chip, we actually met a couple times.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you remember this, but this was back in 2015 or 2016, and I did a little cameo on Nashville, and I had about 2 lines, and I remember we were doing a little read-through with you and Connie Britton.
Yep.
And we sat down, and I'd never done this before, and after about 5 minutes, Connie realized that I wasn't a real actor. And she said, "Wait a minute, are you the actual editor of Southern Living?"
I don't think it took her that long. She's pretty quick.
Yeah.
I remember that. We always went for authenticity. We were always striving for the truth. So it didn't surprise me at all. And you were fantastic.
Well, you guys were very nice to a rookie. So thank you.
No. We appreciate you being on the show. The way I always put it is steal from the truth. Why go hire somebody to play that guy when the guy's kind enough to come join us? So it was perfect. What you need to do is if you're ever traveling elsewhere in Spain or Italy, go see who they voiced you as. What's your Spanish interpretation sounds like?
I would be very curious to hear that. But I will tell you, my acting career pretty much began and ended with that. Yeah.
Well, I'm very glad to say mine did not. I've had a couple jobs since, so I'm grateful.
So it's been a while now. I think it's been 5 or 6 years since y'all stopped shooting Nashville. I'm just wondering, do you ever miss that show and miss that character, Deacon Claybourne?
I do. Absolutely. Those were incredible times for me. That show was a landmark in my career. I've been on a number of shows. I've had a very good career, one I'm very grateful for and happy about, and was able to support a family and raise my kids and everything there in Los Angeles. But Nashville was different. It was the first leading role, like where I was a part of the cast in a long, long time. And then on top of that, the way it opened up all the music for me was incredible. So every day of doing that was the purest joy. But what many people don't understand is that it means so much to me that it ended well, that we landed. It's one thing to get a show up into the air like an airplane, but just like an airplane trip, the important part is the landing. So the fact that we brought it to such a beautiful close and wrapped it up in a way that I feel so content with means that I'm surprisingly okay with it being done.
Yeah.
I would have done it forever if there was a way to do that. But it meant so much to me that we went out so well that I'm able to look at it with, just nothing but gratitude and joy. And the other thing I will say that's so cool is that whereas normally, like most shows when they're done, like a Hill Street Blues or a Lost or whatever your great show was, if you want to engage with that show again, you pretty much got to go watch it again, stream it. With our show, the music is out there. So it's not as much of a commitment. You just go listen to one of those Nashville songs. And I do all the time. And on top of that, we've been able to get together and do a reunion tour. We just got back a couple months ago from being over in the UK. And we did one here at the Ryman Auditorium too, beside these friends of mine, and play these songs and sing these songs and have that audience still care so much and be so moved by it. We're very fortunate. This show's a different thing than everything else, and I'm grateful for that.
That's so great. I love that it's got this life that's continued after the fact,
Absolutely.
and very rare. That just doesn't happen
Yeah.
with other shows. What was the first time that you met Connie Britton?
Well, it's funny because we were huge fans, my wife and I, before that, especially with Friday Night Lights. We used to binge that show. I mean, this is a show about the South. I'm not alone, right?
Yeah.
There's something about that show that captured that Texas life and did it with such realism that I would say to my wife, I just want to be on a show that is real, has scenes like that. And God heard me, I guess, because only a couple years later, here I am. Pretty much the first real scene we really did together was right on that bridge. And we had no way of knowing. Generally, when you put together your lead actress with her love interest, you do a thing called a chemistry read, which means that in the audition, you put the two together and you go, well, is there any there? Because you can have two incredible actors, just like you can have two chemicals and you put them together and it's inert. There's no reaction. It's very much like that. That's why they call it, I'm just realizing it now, a chemistry read. So we didn't do that. I don't know why. They just rolled the dice. So we showed up that day, and I promise you, this is the first thing I said to her. I said, there are a million reasons why I'm excited to do this show, and you are a couple hundred of them. And I meant that. And if I'm honest, I'm more of a fan now than when I met her. Just to be so up close at watching her process and, getting to experience her intelligence, and her humor, her wit, and all that went into it, and her commitment to truth and to it being real. Those things I saw on that other show were not for nothing. They were definitely the writers, the producers, and her co-stars, but a whole lot of it was Connie's authenticity too. And it was a joy to work with that.
Yeah. Well, such a pro. And you had to be married to her for a long time. And people had to believe that, right?
We weren't married that long. We didn't get married till later.
Till much later in the show, right?
In fact, what's funny is that her husband, when the show started, was Eric Close, who played Teddy Conrad. And I had known Eric longer than anybody else on the show by far. We had met when we were young actors in Hollywood in the same acting class. So we were buddies and we got to meet each other again. We hadn't seen each other in a while. And we'd go around to parties and things. Eric knows everybody. Wonderful guy. Everybody loves him. And he would introduce me. He goes, this is my friend Chip. He plays my wife's boyfriend. And we were like, yeah, that's true. So eventually they broke up and Deacon and Raina finally, spoiler alert, did get married. But I got to play her love interest for so long and I loved every bit of it.
Yeah. Well, listen, I just got to say congrats on the new album. It's got to be very exciting for you. It's your first one and it's called Love Ain't Pretty.
Thank you.
And it's got 14 songs on it. Great songs.
Thank you.
And it almost seems like something right out of the show, something that your character could have been coming out with. So it must feel really good.
There is a through line, I have to admit. First of all, if you think about the fact that so much of Deacon was me, but then on top of that, all that Deacon went through, that to me was the thing that bonded everybody to that character. And what that did is it meant that people would come up to me or they would reach out on social media and people would share their own hard times that they'd either been through or were going through right there. They'd talk about their father who had had addiction issues or their aunt who had had a cancer battle or whatever it was. There was something about his path that it moved them, it touched them. What I found through doing this a lot is that sometimes it's harder to face our own problems right on. We sort of wall up, put that shell, don't process it really, just go through it. And then this show comes along or a song and it's more of a bank shot and it sort of gets in behind our defenses. And suddenly you find you're sitting there crying for Deacon in a way that you never cried for this situation in your own life. And it's cathartic and it purges these things, but these people would come up and share that. So what that did is it reinforced in me the importance, the meaningfulness of art, of these depictions, whether it's TV or whether it's music. So what that meant is that whereas I already had some songs, and I got some of my songs on the show, I wrote a song called Looking for the Light with Charlie Worsham and Dennis McCuskey. And Looking for the Light could have gone on this album very easily. What I'm saying is that this thing that I have, this theme that I've learned over my life, that life is hard, brutally hard sometimes, But man, it's beautiful. That is the theme through Love Ain't Pretty. That's the line. Love ain't pretty, but damn, it's beautiful.
I saw somewhere that you'd been working on this album for like 10 years or so. And I'm wondering if some of the songs on the album actually date to the Nashville show, or that you were writing them, as you were working on that.
But it's interesting because some of the work that we talk about when we say it's been 10 years is preparation. And some of the preparation is the other songs I've recorded. So strictly speaking, I don't mean that went into the studio 10 years ago. I mean that I was not ready at that time to do an album. A lot of it is finding out who I was as an artist, which might seem unusual for a guy as old as I am. But when you realize the fact that I've spent a lot of my time portraying other artists, I played Buddy Holly in my very first role in London in the early 90s. After that, I was on Whose Line Is It Anyway, where I would imitate other artists constantly, whether it was Sting or Bono or whoever. Even before that in college, I was in a band, but it was a cover band. So throughout those things, I got rather adept at putting on these masks of other people. So the work in Nashville, where I came to play another person, Deacon, was to peel these masks away and go, all right, what's underneath there? Who am I? What do I have to say? So that's the work of most of those years.
Well, I'm so glad you waited, and it feels very coherent and very much of a piece and very consistent. And I want to talk about it a little bit more in a minute. But before we do that, I wanted to ask you just a little bit about where you grew up. You were born in Pittsburgh, and then you moved to Virginia when you were pretty young. And I'm just wondering, what's the place that feels most like home when you kind of look back?
It would be Virginia. I have such a heart for Pittsburgh. I left there right before third grade. And there's something about Pittsburgh in particular that stays with you. And I've had family there ever since. That when my father was still alive, I was constantly visiting him, summers, holidays. After I was a kid, we would still take my family back there with my dad and with his family and with extended family there. And I still do to this day. And I love them all dearly, but growing up in Virginia. So that would be it. But I will say about Pittsburgh that I left there during those Super Bowl Steeler years. And it's funny, but there's something a little bit true about it, that you might have noticed that wherever you go in the NFL, when the Steelers are playing, there's a good contingent there. There's a reason that no team travels as well as the Steelers. It's because when those teams were making their glory in those 4 Super Bowls, in those years of the 70s, Pittsburgh's economy was cratering, and the steel mills were closing, and the mining was drying up, and the factories. And what happened was that there were so many folks that had to leave Pittsburgh. I left because my mom was leaving, my dad, and we were going to Virginia. Other folks were leaving for those reasons. But I was no different for them. When I left, all I had was my Steeler coat and my terrible towel. And it seems like nothing, and it seems silly, but it was something concrete that I could hang on to with pride that meant Pittsburgh to me. And I know I'm not alone in that. That's why there's grandchildren to those kids that have hardly ever even been to Pittsburgh that are just diehard Steeler fans. And it sort of cemented then also my feeling, as I have a bit of an outsider's mentality, that it's never really quite gone away, that started there. Like even when I was in Virginia, I went to a neighborhood where these folks had all grown up together from birth. So even though I was coming at age 8 or 9, you'd think that's early enough since I'm, but I was still a bit of the new kid for a long time. And even when I went to Los Angeles, I always felt that way. Even though I was able to work my whole life, I never felt like I was in that in group. Of course, I might not be alone in that. But then even coming here to Nashville and being part of this music industry, but not all the way in. I'm not getting radio play. That's just not my experience. So I think that identity, that's a part of who I am. And it's also a part of why I became an entertainer, like the new guy trying to get noticed, trying to get liked and make everybody feel comfortable. So
yeah,
both of those places are my homes, and they both are a major part of me.
Yeah. Always a little bit of an outsider mentality, maybe.
Yeah. It's funny because Nashville, I think when I first got to Nashville, this was different. John Denver has a line where he says, coming home to a place he'd never been before. That's exactly how I felt about Nashville. And over the years, I sort of go, Oh, it's so funny. Sometimes I look at where I'm driving and I go, this could be Virginia. This is Virginia right now. And other times, especially in these winter times, I'll come up over a hill and the brown and the trees. I go, this looks like Pittsburgh. So I feel both of those places that are deep within me right here in Nashville. That might be another reason besides the music and the good people here of why I feel so at home.
Chip, I want to ask you about your dad. You mentioned him, and I know you lost him about 15 years or so ago. And I saw you post somewhere, you were talking about what an influence he was on you in terms of music. Tell me a little bit about that. What did he kind of instill in you when it comes to music?
What's interesting, there's a line in my second song that says, it says a little right now, and it's about needing more faith. It says, I'm a farmer praying for rain. I'm a gambler who needs an ace of spades. I'm a sailor hoping for a gust of wind. I'm a singer looking for that song, a prisoner that ain't got long. I'm a dreamer waiting for my ship to come in. That's what my dad was. That's where I got that phrase. My dad was always said, he was a salesman. So he's always saying, I'm waiting for my ship to come in. And that kind of faith and looking down the road, it carried him, especially his actual faith. But he went through some hard times, whether it was the divorce and losing his family. Later, when he remarried, he and his new wife, Jan, had not been married that long when they had a baby, and he lost that son to crib death. They got super involved in the Sudden Infant Death Syndrome Foundation, and they established the one in Western Pennsylvania. So I saw again and again my dad go through very, very hard times, especially for somebody that lived on that dream. And two things I saw. The first primarily was his faith carried him, and that influenced me as well. But then I also saw what music meant to him constantly. And I recall it so well because he was always singing along or had music going. And he talked about the doo-wop group he was a part of in college, and they would always sing, and he'd go, do, 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 do. Like, Blue Moon and all those songs. But I can remember driving down the road with him, and he had the console in the middle there, and his fingers would just rat-a-tat-tat on that console. And it's even weird looking at it now because see that ring right there? That is a signet ring from my college, William & Mary, which is exactly where he went to school. As you get older, your hands start to look like your dad's. Does that happen to you?
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So sometimes I look down and my fingers are tapping, and that's my dad's stocky little square little hand just rapping away. But the songs that meant so much to him would carry him. Like the ones I recall was Simon and Garfunkel. And he had just been through this heartbreaking thing, this divorce, and we're still visiting. I'm still a little kid. But he's singing, I am a rock, I am an island, and a rock feels no pain, and an island never cries. And I knew it, even being young, I knew this, he was yelling these things out into the world. Or Neil Diamond's, I am, I said, to no one there, and no one heard it all. So I didn't put it all together then, but this album, and let's be honest, country music, that's the essence of country music. Come on, Lord, get me through another day. This hard things just happened. So I'm either going to cry into my beer or I'm going to go hit the jukebox and we're going to have a time tonight.
Yeah.
And those things, the essence of that, a lot of that is all over this album. Just his introducing me to music. And he introduced me to Buddy Holly and introduced me to Waylon and Willie and, all these greats. The Opry. I know everything I know about the Opry because of my father. But that would have been one level. The level that I got even more from it is the power of those things. And some of this I'm thinking as I say it for the first time to you. But the power of those things is what this album's about.
Mm. Well, I saw a picture that you posted on, I think, Facebook or Instagram a few years ago, and it was you sitting by a campfire with your dad, and you've got a guitar in your hand. And I know that he would have been incredibly proud to see you coming out with this new album.
Oh, man. Sid, you're getting me where I live. My dad, I was so blessed that he got to see me play Buddy Holly. He got to be in the audience for that. And he said, you can't even wrap your head around what this is like for me. I got to feel all that. And he was very good at verbalizing. He was an emotionally intelligent guy. And he said, you can't know what it was like to drop that needle down onto this 45 called That'll Be the Day. And he's not as knowledgeable about music. I know that what he was hearing was Buddy Holly's Stratocaster. And it's a sound that baffled and drew all of the British musicians of that time, from Paul McCartney and John Lennon to Eric Clapton and on and on. That Stratocaster sound was not that well known yet. So that introduction, well, that'll be, he's talking about that. right? And he goes, for me to remember that moment so clearly and now to be sitting in the audience while you whip into that intro, into that song. So he got to see that. He did not get to be here for Nashville. He did not get to see me in person at the Grand Ole Opry. I do believe he's watching from elsewhere. But even in that moment, me with that guitar playing for my dad around a bonfire, I remember feeling or knowing that I was helping ease some of his pain with that guitar. That's a powerful thing. And like I said, Nashville reinforced it, the power of that can happen. And now I'm part of a group called Musicians on Call, which I ask anybody to look up musiciansoncall.org. And it's incredible. Why nobody thought of this sooner? It's been over 25 years now. And 1 million patients at musiciansoncall.org has taken an artist that has volunteered, brought them into a hospital setting or hospice or a veterans hospital or a children's hospital. And first they ask, there's somebody here with a guitar that would love to sing some songs. Are you interested? And some folks say, not right now. And some folks say, yes. And you walk in that room and that same feeling comes back to me as when I was with my dad, that it's not that I'm so amazing or so great. There's something about this warm wooden instrument in this cold, sterile environment. I've seen the power of what it can do. So that's, again, part of that recurring theme I'm talking about. That's like, hey, let's share something. It's funny because, people say, let's get on the same wavelength. Well, sound has a wavelength. And when everybody's listening to something together at a concert or around a campfire, we're all on the same wavelength. And we get to go away for a second to this place. And I've seen that ability. And once you taste that, it's a little addicting in a good way, because you just want to bless whoever you can with it. You're like the little drummer boy. This is what I have. This is what I can do. I hope it blesses you.
After the break, I'll talk more with Charles Esten about his brand new debut album, Love Ain't Pretty. I'm also going to ask him a few rapid fire questions that we call the Jam Session.
I'm Charles Esten, and this is my Southern Living Jam Session.
All right, biscuits or cornbread?
Cornbread.
Oh, okay.
No offense to the show.
Sweet or unsweet?
Unsweet.
Acoustic or electric?
Acoustic.
Waylon or Willie?
Waylon.
Oh. Charleston or Nashville?
Nashville.
Had to think about that one for a second.
No, it's Nashville. I just do love Charleston. Go ahead. I love Willie. I'm just doing my job here. I'm just answering.
I'd love to sing a duet with blank.
Willie.
My favorite Southern town is blank.
Alexandria, Virginia.
My favorite barbecue joint is blank.
Oh, Peg Leg Porker.
Good one. My favorite dive bar is blank.
Well, I don't know how divey it is, but Robert's Western World. If we're going full dive bar, then I'll say Santa's Pub.
Okay. The dish I'm known for cooking is blank.
Ooh. Upscaled leftovers. I'll explain real fast that my kids have always been amazed that I can reach in the fridge and pull out anything that is in there from the last week and turn it into some brand new thing that blows their mind. So I'm not an originator. I'm the remix. I do the remix. Pork Chops 2.0.
But that's a talent. That's great.
Yeah.
The best dog I ever had was named blank.
Blue. That dog was named Sue on the show Nashville when he was a puppy, but when they wrote it off, I told him, you're not getting him back. So I took him home and I changed his name to Blue because he was a boy named Sue, but I wasn't going to do that to him. But I wanted the name to be close enough that I didn't go Blue. And he went, who's he talking to? So Blue sounds like Sue. And then later Blue had some puppies and we got one of them. And that dog, who I also love dearly, is Ryman, just like the auditorium. But Blue's my boy Blue.
I love that. All right, last one. The most Southern thing about me is blank.
My love of my family.
Great. Chip, I want to ask you about your mom too.
Please. I'd be a bad son if we didn't talk about her too.
So she really raised you in a lot of ways. You moved to Virginia, like you said. What did she do for a living?
I want to start and say that she, for all I've been building my father up, even he would say the reason for the hard times, some of that was brought on by himself. He had some difficulty, especially in the early years, anger issues or drinking too much, just a lack of discipline for him to focus and do the things. And so early on, it was important to her. She said she stayed for 9 years because she thought that a boy should have a father. My sister should have a father. But then at a certain point, she started to wonder if I was getting the right lessons. And so there just reached a time where she couldn't do that anymore. And she left, which sort of helped him reach one of his rock bottoms, which I know his faith came from that rock bottom. So as hard as it was for her and as difficult as it was for him, it led him to reassess, do some things differently. And, like most Christians, it didn't ever get him perfect. It just got him saved, and it got him always aiming to pick himself up and do better. So that's about him. But now about her. She'd been very bright, straight A student all through high school and even the college where they met, but she had subsumed herself. And of course, this was the mid 60s to early 70s. So you're just now getting the women's liberation movement and I Am Woman, Hear Me Roar and all that. And she hit that at exactly the right time, but it was still difficult to do as a woman to start from nothing and having no work experience for 9 years. So she started out working for my uncle as an assistant or receptionist or secretary in his boat dealership. And my grandfather worked for the government for a while. We were there in Alexandria, Virginia. You're right there across the Potomac River. He said, just get a job in there and I know you'll flourish. I know you'll do well. And she did. She started at the lowest rank you could in the Environmental Protection Agency. And by the time she retired, 25 some years later, she had gone as high up and as far as she could in a non-political appointment. She's an extraordinary woman. She's very, very bright and such a hard worker. Again, I'm not doing my dad a disservice. It's true. My dad had his own company. And I can promise you that my mother worked harder at the dining room table into the middle of the night for the government than my dad worked for his own company. It's just who she was. But it was not just who she was, it was who she was also knowing she had 2 children to raise and bring up, because my father wasn't going to be a place to go for the child support, any of that was coming as it could and sometimes wouldn't. My mom put us through college. My mom did all those things and sacrificed while raising us. So I was funny because I was raised by these 2 parents. My father, super charismatic, fill a room, artistic, sing. But his side of the coin also had that other side of the coin too. I can be undisciplined. I can be a little bit lazy here. I can have all these emotions, but so fully human and loved him so much. And then my mother had this more dependable, reliable, strong, hardworking, focused. If you want to talk about how they both dealt with their bank accounts, so that my mother scrimped and saved. And it was unfair because when I was with my mother, going to McDonald's was a big discussion. And no, we don't need to go to McDonald's. And then go to my dad's house and we'd be at a steakhouse or going to Disneyland. His theory was, how is life worth living if I can't take my kids to a steakhouse? And so I was raised in this area between this utter yin and this utter yang. And somehow the 2 of them blessed me to find this middle ground. But my mother, I have so much love and respect for. There's a song on here that is for my wife called Candlelight. But I know my mother influenced all these songs. She's in there on all of them. She's the strength inside of me. She's the hard work inside of me. She's loving through action inside of me. And she glows and she dances in the night when the cold wind blows and she lights up a room and she could burn this town down if she wanted to. She's powerful. And so my mom has all those things in her as well. And I wouldn't be here without her. The other thing I have to give to my mom is my father could have and should have been an actor and in music. And so I've heard it said that we're living out our father's dreams or our parents' dreams they didn't chase. And there's a lot of that in there. But my mother, she's not exactly Depression era, but she has some of that from childhood and raising up and needing to make sure they had enough money. She has her anxieties and her fears about the future, or at that time did, and would have been very concerned about my future. And so I could have easily seen a world where my mother would have said, that's all great and that's nice, you can do that, but you need to get something that lasts, something you can bank on, something you can build on. But she looked at me for who I was and what I brought. And when I told her I was going to be in a band or I was going to go be an actor, whatever she felt of that, she said, then go do it. Go do that. And that's a tremendous blessing as well.
Mm. What comes to mind when you think of her cooking?
I think of the fact that she didn't get a chance to do that as much as she would have liked because she was working. She was working. And so she was making meals that she was pulling together for us. And there wasn't a lot of money behind these meals. So Over the years, she's made some wonderful dishes, but I don't think of my mother and that. Oh, I will say though, it's funny because Southern Living, it was always on the counter and everything. And so she always would read of those things and this life that if she wasn't busting her butt 24/7, that easier Southern life of making these biscuits or this ham or whatever. And we always had great meals. We were surrounded by her parents as long as they were alive and blessed us, and her sisters and her brothers. And so there were always potlucks. So when I think of my mom, I think of her bringing something to that potluck. Some of them were super Southern, like the Jello mold kind of desserts in them, that kind of thing. Some great dips, meatballs. I don't know when that came into the family, but hot sausage with a little Bisquick in it and cheddar cheese. Those are every Christmas and all. You get to pop those while you're waiting for the other food. And I do remember she made Bisquick biscuits. I remember those very well. I loved those, man. I haven't had one of those in forever. It's just straight out of the box Bisquick and spoon of it's wax. So it had no shape to it. It was just sort of amorphous, but you would break it open. That was fantastic.
But you can still taste it. You can all probably still remember exactly what that tasted like.
Oh, absolutely. And another Southern thing, it's so funny because she was never a big drinker or partier. But when we got a cold or a flu or something, out came the hot toddy. So even as like an 8 or 9-year-old, a little warmed up whiskey with some honey in there. And even I remember a little tang in there or something like that. Just something to give it a little kick for your cold. Not a ton of it. We weren't drunk or anything, but it's just she swore by the hot toddy for the sore throat.
Well, she must be excited about the new album, I'm sure, too.
She's my biggest fan for sure. I'm very grateful that I get to play a great venue in Alexandria. It's called the Birchmere. Coming up on 10 years, I think, or something like that every year. My wife and I switch like a lot of families, Christmas for your family this year, Christmas for my family next year. And then meanwhile, you swap the Thanksgivings against those. So I'm either there at Alexandria Thanksgiving or Christmas. And I have been so blessed to see from the stage. It's a bit of a view, but my mom out there just being in the moment and getting to share those things. She has always been my biggest fan. I'd be remiss if I didn't say that she scrimped and saved and bought me my first guitar and my sister and I our first piano. And I remember I would go, Mom, come watch this. And I would play her a song that I had written. And she was so proud. But I think she was always concerned and worried that, what do I do with this talent in this house, this kid? I don't know. And I want it to turn into something. I remember she said to me, you know what you need to do? You need to write a letter to Paul Anka. And I'm a kid. I'm like, I'm not going to write a letter to Paul Anka. But in retrospect, maybe I should have. I don't know. I later saw that John Mayer had written, I'm trying to remember who he wrote a letter to, but these different folks have done that. And she also saw, I think, how I took music and that piano. And on those days that I was hurting from the divorce or from whatever it was, man, I poured it into that. Playing a new song or playing somebody else's, it's always been there for me. And she was the one that gave that to me, to be there for me. My father gave me the love, but she was where the rubber hit the road. You can have all the love in the world you want, but if you can't afford a guitar or piano, good luck.
Yeah. Well, Chip, I want to talk about a couple songs on the album. And so it's called Love Ain't Pretty. And, it sounds like an album that's by someone who's been around the block a few times, who's got some life experience. And when you look back at the songs that you wrote for this, I'm wondering if there was one song that kind of set the tone for the album. That you wrote it and you kind of felt like, okay, this is different. This is something that I want to keep doing.
It actually came in the other direction. We had every song except for one song, just in the middle of all our pre-production and getting ready. My producer, Marshall, and I had been set up for a write completely unrelated to this. And it was me, my producer, and Jimmy Yeary. He was a fantastic songwriter. And the three of us got in there, and Jimmy had a title idea, and we kept writing on it, and it just wasn't clicking. So we sort of adjusted it. And then we said, what is it we're trying to say here? And this happens to me a lot as an actor. Like in a scene, if the scene's not working, I go down to that. What is the scene trying to say? What is my character trying to say? Then you verbalize it. And so in that day, we're trying to say, look, life is hard, man. It can be brutal. It can kill you. And I said, and I go, love ain't pretty. And we went, love ain't pretty. And that would have been pretty good. But we said, but damn, it's beautiful. That summed it up. That made it more. That's not just like, who wants to hear a song that says life is hard? The end. Good night, everybody. Life is hard, but damn, it's worth it.
Mm.
And so there we are, the other 13 already. And here comes, and I'm certain the reason for that is, it's like a crock pot. We're just basting in these thoughts and these other songs. And so that through line found its expression in that song. And as soon as we wrote it, I'm like, well, there's our title track and there's our first one. There's our thesis statement, you know? So that one actually came afterwards. So
Interesting.
it happens like that sometimes, yeah.
Yeah.
The album said what the album was. I didn't.
Love ain't pretty, no love ain't pretty, damn, it's beautiful.
There's another one on there that's called One Good Move.
Mm-hmm.
And it's about a guy who's made a lot of questionable decisions, shall we say, except for one. And that's the person that he's addressing the song to.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if there's a little autobiography in that one.
Oh, there's not a little. There's a lot. That's it. In fact, that song came from, I was at a writer's retreat. A bunch of us got together and a friend had invited me to this. And this is another thing I found in creativity, that sometimes where you're meant to be in a creative moment, your whole body, it cries out against going. It's called resistance. Have you ever been getting ready to do your podcast or your show and you don't want to at all? And you're like this close from making a phone call because you do have a little bit of a tickle. So I could probably cancel. Let's just push this thing off, or whatever else you're working on creatively. And it's not just creatively, but I really think it happens creatively. What I have come to find is whenever I get that feeling, over the years, I've let it win sometimes, and I've never felt good about that. So when I fight it and I go anyway, what I find is that's when the magic happens. Some devil, some demon on my shoulder was trying to keep me from this beautiful thing. And I had no way of knowing that. But I'm sharing that because now when you hear that resistance, look that demon right now and go, nice try, I'm going. If I feel like I don't want to go, there must be something good waiting for me. I've come to believe that now. So I went to this thing and I met these great writers. And at lunchtime, I'd already written one song. At lunchtime, I was talking with these 3 young female writers, all great. And in fact, I was praising them, saying how I was so impressed by how at a young age they were so together, so driven, so focused, so disciplined, making this happen. I was not that guy. I was a little bit of a dissolute youth, nothing too off the grid or anything too bad. Just some of that laziness in there, making the wrong choices, not going to class, doing this instead. And I was not wise. I will say that. Who is at that age? Very few are. Some are. I was not. And yet that guy that I was telling them, I made so many mistakes, except for one, I said, except for my wife. Somehow that fool that I was wise enough to see her and go, all right, moron, you're going to make a lot of mistakes. Don't screw this up. Hang on to that one. And I did. And I look back now and I thank God for that voice inside of me through all that immaturity that said, hang on to this one. I said, she was my one good move. I just said it. And in this town, you'll see a room full of people and somebody will say something. And you can always see the writers in the room because instantly they go and they put that phrase in their phone. Or they'll look at each other like, that was a title. Usually I'm the one that hears titles. I don't know if you ever knew, but while he didn't write a bunch of songs, Ringo would frequently speak in titles.
Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, really?
Yeah, Ringo said it's been a hard day's night. One of those, they call them Ringoisms, I think. And Paul and John were like, hard day's night? Whoever? Yeah, I've been working 8 days a week. So some people talk in titles and other people hear them. Usually I hear them. But that day I spoke one. And it was the other 3 when we got into that right that said, well, we're definitely going to write that. And I was like, write what? And they said, one good move.
And how long have y'all been together now?
Oh my goodness. We met on January 25th in 1986.
Wow.
So we are coming up on, we're about 37 years. And we got married in 91. So we haven't been married as long, but we've been together most of my life.
That's great.
And she's definitely my one good move. I just thought that's completely autobiographical. By the way, I should add, now that you know my mother and my father, you go, how did they ever get together? And they were so different. I used to ask myself that constantly. And the answer came up with was they met in college. And when you meet somebody in college, my young self told myself, it's an artificial environment where everybody's on their best behavior. And so, note to self, don't marry someone that you meet in college. Well, I end up going to the exact same college, and I marry a girl from the exact same sorority. And of course, it worked. She was my one good move. So there's no lessons to be learned from any of that. It's just what works, works.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
There was trouble to get into, I was getting into it. If there was something that I shouldn't do, you know I would do it. I was young, I was dumb, I was always on the run. Messed it up all the once, 'cause when I look at you, I see my one good move. Yeah, my one good move.
There's another song that I just got to tell you. I love this song, and I don't think it's released yet as we're talking, but it's called Maybe I'm All Right.
Yeah.
And it's very simple in a lot of ways, but it seems to really suit your voice, and it kind of rises to this great crescendo in a really nice way. I just loved it. I really enjoy that one. Do you ever kind of need to tell yourself that you're all right? Is that part of where that came from?
Would you mind if just for 1 second I flipped it on you? I get to talk about these songs and end up talking about them constantly. I have not yet heard somebody talk about what a song means to you, because yours is as valid as mine. Did that resonate with you at all? Or can I ask you that for a second?
Absolutely.
What did it mean to you?
Well, maybe I'm all right. I think, everybody's got their demons, and everybody's kind of carrying things around with them, and they've got their struggles, and they've got their challenges, and they've got their shortcomings. So I think you kind of have to wake up every day and say, maybe I'm all right. Maybe with all of this that's going on, I'm okay. And you kind of have to tell yourself that to get through the day, or at least that's some of what I took away from
Well,
it.
no, I mean, that's it. That's what I was putting out there. And more than anything, what I love about it is I like where it comes in the album. It's on the final third of the album, I would say. So, yeah, we've said love ain't pretty. We've been down on our knees praying for a little bit more help. We've done when love ain't love. We've talked about losing love. And at this point, it's a realization that is in some ways disconnected, not disconnected like the reality's not true, but I'm just saying that in the exact same reality, nothing's really changed. And you can perceive it all from, I'm in such trouble. Nothing's ever going to work. I've been fighting the same battle for so long. Why don't I get any better at this? You'd think by now I could have conquered this. And there's been so many times I thought I could. And then here I am with the same anger, the same whatever that is, the same pain, the same addiction, the same whatever. Am I going to be cursed with this battle forever? And without anything changing, that you can have another voice go, well, maybe, but take a look right now at your life and the love in it and the light in it and the joy in it, aside from this thing, which, yes, we will continue to fight. We'll ask God's help in that battle, but maybe you're okay. Maybe you can handle this. And maybe if this is your lot in life, I forget, was it Paul that said this thorn that you always carry with you? Okay, so maybe you have this thorn. Maybe you can carry that. Maybe it's a perception thing is what I'm saying.
And it's a choice. It's a choice to some degree.
Yeah. It is a blessing to be blessed with that vision of it. And it is a revelation. Even within the song, I like how it's a revelation that it starts off with just me and my voice on a keyboard. So I go, and that's me playing that little part. We have a much better keyboard player on the album named Tim Lauer. He's a genius. But I think in that moment, Marshall, my producer, wanted it to feel more personal and confessional, just Chip on a keyboard. And it starts really quietly, like, ba-dum, boom. You can almost picture the old cliched light bulb overhead, like, wait a second. I've been going through all this. I've been fighting it. I've been on my knees and back again. And here I am. So maybe I'm more than just that thing. And maybe that won't define me. And what that does is it lets you let go a little and breathe through it. And I think then you're more likely to be able to win more battles when you're like that, instead of the desperation of I'll never make it. I'll never do this. So if anybody could hear that song for a second and go, maybe I'm all right. Maybe just a little crazy suits me fine.
Yeah.
It just occurred to me. It just came on like a light. Maybe I'm all right. Sometimes there's a line or two in a song that lift it. And a lot of times they're throwaways. I like a lot of the throwaway lines I have at the end of my songs in this album. One of them is, maybe I don't need the victory. Maybe I just like the fight. Maybe I'm all right. And that's interesting. What if you think about that way, that, yeah, I'm a soldier along the way, and this is my life's battle, and off we go.
Well, I love that one. And there's so many great ones on this album, and I hope people listen to every one of them.
Thank you.
Chip, I just have one more question for you.
Sure.
What does it mean to you to be Southern?
I think the part that resonates with me the most, what I want is connection, one-to-one. And I told you about it, whether it's through the musicians on call or playing with my dad. Some of it might be a cliche, but I remember going to New York and I didn't feel that connection. I know they have their communities up there for sure. I don't know what they're like, but I often felt that when I walked out, that city confronted me. Like the cold, the loudness. There's something about the South. I don't know if it's the more literal warmth in the climate. That might be a part of it. But even coming from LA, we had lived on the same street in LA for 15 years, and we knew more people on this street in Nashville in a week than we did in 15 years on that street. Some of that's down to us, but some of it's down to people bringing bundt cakes and people just saying, nice to meet you. And so there's community and a culture of kindness. And none of this is to let go of the history of the South. The South's had its times where it wasn't so kind. And that's all exactly true. And maybe part of that leads into the culture now. But you want to be better than you were. So that warmth is escalated. But I feel it, man. And I see it in individual people that I hold up as models and heroes, whether it's like, I'll give you a couple, Vince Gill and Amy Grant here are a model of Southern gentility and warmth. But there's a strength underneath, and there's talent underneath. I see that again and again at the Grand Ole Opry. There's these people that are at the very top of the game and couldn't be any better, but there's a warmth and there's a welcoming, whether it was little Jimmy Dickens, who was 93 when I met him and had been there when Hank Williams was there and had every right to say, this is our community, you're an interloper, you're a guy on a TV show, so you can play here, but don't make yourself at home. It was the opposite of that. It was welcome, welcome. And that welcome is at the heart of what the Southern experience is to me. Sitting around a campfire, gathering at the Grand Ole Opry, doing a guitar pull where we pass the guitar around. That's a long answer, but that's mostly what it means to me.
Well, that's a great one. And Chip Esten, it's great to see you again. And congrats on the album and everything else. And thanks so much for being on Biscuits and Jam.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me. And thanks so much for helping out on Nashville.
I think I might have done that show in.
No. We survived you by far.
Thanks for listening to my conversation with Charles Esten. Southern Living is based in Birmingham, Alabama. Be sure to follow Biscuits and Jam on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. And we would love your feedback. If you could rate this podcast and leave us a review, preferably a nice one, we'd really appreciate it. You can also find us online at southernliving.com/biscuitsandjam. Our theme song is by Sean Watkins of Nickel Creek. I hope you'll join me next week when I'll be talking with Devin Allman, a musician who's managed to chart his own path while also honoring his father's legacy. We'll see you then.